In today's episode, we're looking at 5 PlayStation 4 games that look and run great on the PlayStation 5 and the PlayStation 5 Pro. So this is actually the second entry of this series of looking at PlayStation 4 games running on better hardware. I had been wanting to do this for months already on my base PS5, but because I got a hold of the PS5 Pro, naturally I started playing them on that. Now there's a few things I need to make clear. First off, any PlayStation 5 does a great job of running PS4 games. The inherent boosting built into PS5 maxes out dynamic resolutions and stabilizes frame rates. So either playing for the first time or revisiting PS4 games on PlayStation 5 really is a treat. Now when it comes to the PlayStation 5 Pro, which I captured all these games on, it does introduce an exclusive feature. When you go to your system settings, screen and video output, you see the option to enhance image quality for PS4 games, and it describes it as improve the image quality of PS4 games to enjoy higher quality gameplay for some games. Turn this off if you experience unexpected behavior during gameplay, so mileage may vary, test accordingly. I actually haven't ran into any problems yet. Another thing to note, if your TV or monitor is in at least 1440p resolution or greater, you won't even be able to access it, it'll just be grayed out. Now, what exactly is this toggle doing? It's hard to say for certain. It seems to be some sort of smart upscaler, which is what Digital Foundry pointed out, and I agree with that, particularly for images that are 1080p or less. Now, to what degree it upscales it, how much better it makes it look, it varies quite a bit. In some games, it's fairly pronounced and noticeable and looks a little bit better. In other games, depending on the type of engine it's running, it's either hardly noticeable or non-existent. So it really depends. 1886, for example, because of all the film grain going on in the graphics, I couldn't see any difference at all. Whereas Dark Souls 3, on the other hand, in the previous video I did on this, it was noticeably better. Now, is it worth spending $700 for this exclusive feature? No, I would never promote that. It just depends on what you want to do. I'm enjoying the PS5 Pro, and I think this feature works pretty well when it does work. So like I said, mileage may vary, do whatever feels right for you. But at the end of the day, this is for all PlayStation 5 owners. And really, all of this is just a vehicle to talk about these PlayStation 4 games. There's a lot of classics on the PlayStation 4. I've been wanting to showcase and talk about these, and the fact that they run better than before on newer hardware is just icing on the cake. Having said all that, let's get to our first title. And the first title on our list is Tomb Raider Definitive Edition. This PlayStation 4 port was released in 2014. So I've been a fan of Tomb Raider since it first came out in 1996. And the version I played back at that time was actually the PC version. I didn't really get to play the PlayStation version until about a year or two later. Tomb Raider is a very nostalgic franchise for me, especially Tomb Raider 2, which I played quite a bit on PlayStation. That'll be another episode where we'll go into that. So when this first rebooted on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 in terms of consoles back in 2013, it was quite impressive at the time. But a mere year later they released this Definitive Edition, which I'm glad they did because it is quite a bump up from those versions. I actually like the redesign of Lara Croft. They made her more lifelike, but still very much Lara. The visuals actually hold up quite well, especially when you consider the fact that this originally came out on 7th generation hardware. While the PlayStation 4 port here has always targeted 60 frames per second, it was never able to consistently hold it when action gets intense, dropping as low as into the 40s. The PlayStation 5, on the other hand, is able to keep it at a lock 60, so it plays smoother than ever. So the reboot of the franchise here was very different from what it came from. First off, it was the first one to be rated mature. It was a lot darker, grittier, more violent. So in a way, the series kind of grew up with its audience a little bit. Lara Croft is more vulnerable. It kind of goes back to Lara Croft and her roots. She's not fully experienced yet. She has some skills, but she's more afraid and having to learn how to deal with these situations. So there's more vulnerability with her character. In the original games, you pretty much right off the bat got the more seasoned Lara Croft and is more of a loner. Now that's cool, and there's a certain charm to that, just being by yourself, because there's not very many characters in the original games, but in this game, you're actually surrounded by a number of characters. But of course, eventually it dwindles down to pretty much just Lara. As the game progresses, as more things happen, she becomes more and more visceral. So she really does have quite the character arc throughout this game. So they actually did quite a good job of rebooting all this and giving us a new approach, whether it be newcomers of the franchise or fans alike. Now, some may not have liked her design so much. Like I said, I actually liked her redesign. In terms of gameplay, they added a lot more RPG elements and depth. There's an actual leveling up system where you obtain different skills. You're able to upgrade your weapons. You hunt down animals to gain experience. You find various items in order to obtain more supplies to further upgrade your weapons. There's a lot of exploring to do, there's a lot of optional things to find, so it really does encourage you to explore all the areas, which is very cool, to the point that you're able to actually fast travel to previous areas in order to fully complete them. But when it's all said and done, how good is the combat? How good is the core gameplay? It's very solid. The gunplay feels good, the stealth feels pretty good, and the more the game goes, the more visceral it gets, the more guns you get, the more the action intensifies. It's actually a very cool game. I've always really appreciated it. With graphics that hold up really well, if you're a fan of Lara Croft or just a newcomer that wants to see what Lara Croft's all about, and you want visceral, detailed gameplay with RPG elements, you really can't go wrong with Tomb Raider. And there's more games to the series after this that are also fantastic and get even more beautiful in the visuals. So if you've never played Tomb Raider or you're a fan that never got back to the series, you should definitely check out Tomb Raider Definitive Edition. It's a really solid game. Up next, we have Godzilla, released for the PlayStation 4 in 2015. I've always been a huge fan of the Godzilla franchise, and this game is my favorite Godzilla game. It really is a blast to play as a Godzilla fan, and yeah, critics tried panning it. There are some people that panned it. I always disagreed. I think the game is underrated, and I think it's really fun. Now, unfortunately, the game has been delisted and is way out of print, so in order to get a hold of a copy, if you don't already have one or own it digitally, you're going to spend hundreds of dollars getting a hold of one, so that is very unfortunate. But I really wanted to show this game and talk about it anyway for people that either do own it or at the very least just want to see what it's about, because I really do love this game. As a Godzilla fan, the authenticity of this game is off the charts. The sound effects, all the various monsters and kaiju you're able to play, from Godzilla to Biollante to Jet Jaguar. There's so much here, even different versions of Godzilla, all the way up to Godzilla 2014, which is a really cool addition here, and he's a blast to play. Now for me, it's second nature because I've played it so much, but the control scheme and the mechanics take a little bit of getting used to, but when you do and master them, it's a lot of fun. One of my only actual critiques of the game is the online versus mode. Not the fact that it exists, it's kind of goofy and fun, even though it's totally unbalanced and broken half the time, but the fact that you cannot fight anybody in couch co-op, just like you versus a friend in person, you can't do it. It's strictly online for versus, and that's really a shame. So for me, the versus mode is pretty much just a throwaway because I really don't like playing against random people online because the game is cheap and broken in terms of you have no balancing between all the different monsters and their abilities. Although, truth be told, I did have some fun with it a little bit. But really though, for me, it's about the single player content. There's various modes to pick from. The evolution mode where you play as Godzilla throughout a campaign. The goal is to clear out the map and destroy as much as you can to make Godzilla get bigger. You take on other kaiju that come in as you're doing it, and ultimately you're taking out these generators where he gets more of his growth and energy from. It really is a lot of fun destroying everything. Even though on PlayStation 4 it targeted 60 frames per second, anytime you destroyed anything it bogged down quite a bit, whereas on PlayStation 5 it's at a lock 60 no matter what's going on. So the destruction feels smoother than ever. It really is a blast. And it looks great. The graphics are very clean here. There's actually a neat learning curve to figuring out all the different moves that all the different kaiju have at their disposal. Even though all the controls of all of them are similar, they all have intricate differences between each other, what control options do what for which kaiju. This game is truly a love letter to Godzilla fans, everything about it. The bios you're able to read, all the different kaiju you're able to play, their authentic sound effects, different versions of them. The fact you're able to play any combination you want, even though the main campaign mode or the evolution mode, you play as Godzilla, you're also able to invade as other kaiju any way you want. You can defend as friendly kaiju as you want. Those are restricted down to the type of kaiju they are, whether it be friendly kaiju or enemy kaiju. Or you can select any kaiju you like, going against random kaiju across 6 different stages in the King of the Monsters mode. And you really do need to figure out each kaiju and their strengths and weaknesses and what works best for their attack style. So there is quite a bit of depth here. There's a ton to do and a ton to unlock. And all the kaijus have their own upgrades that you're able to do. They give them more meter, they give them better attacks. Now, are all of them balanced and as good as one another? No, there's clearly ones that are better than the other. But that's part of the fun. The game doesn't really care about balancing, it just wants you to have fun and try everything out. I had such a blast playing this, unlocking one kaiju to the next, doing everything you can to get every little bit of points out to make Godzilla as large as possible, to wreak as much havoc as possible. It really is a blast. And I also really love defending the environments with the defense mode. So there's something for everybody here. So this is an absolute must if you have any way of playing this as a Godzilla fan. Or if you're just a monster movie fan, you just want to have a blast, if you have any way of playing this. I know it's hard to get a hold of, it's unfortunate, but I really wanted to talk about it. Next on our list is Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2, released for the PlayStation 4 in 2016. Real quick before we hop into Ultimate Alliance 2, I wanted to take a quick peek at the first game. So the first game originally came out on PlayStation 2, Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, Wii, everything back in 2006. Then they re-released it on Xbox One and PlayStation 4 back in 2016. So when they re-released these, they were digital only. But since then, they've been delisted, so unfortunately, they are not available anymore unless you already own them digitally like I do, and I'm able to download on my PlayStation 5. So at the very least, you get a glimpse at the games this way, or if you do own them, they're definitely worth re-downloading and checking out on your PlayStation 5 if you have them. The first game really is a classic. If you want to see a more in-depth look at that, I played the 360 version in my previous video talking about Xbox 360 games that are not backwards compatible, so check that out if you want to see my more in-depth look at the first game. But now we're going to take a look at Ultimate Alliance 2, which I've yet to cover on the channel, and I only have it on PlayStation 4. Running on PlayStation 5, it runs at a locked 60 frames per second, it plays buttery smooth. And it really does look nice, the visuals hold up really well. Now compared to the first game, they added a lot of ragdoll physics and object physics, so there's a lot more chaos going on that's very cool. Oddly enough, this actually came out 3 years later from the first game when it came out originally on PlayStation 3 and 360. So the character models and the physics and the textures, everything was definitely a visual bump, although I think the lighting effects in the first game are still very impressive. Thankfully, with both of these re-releases, they included all of the DLC characters automatically, so even if the DLC is delisted on the original games, and you bought these versions, you got all of the characters, including the optional villains and everything. So there's tons of characters to choose from at the very start of the game, even if you don't unlock them in the story. And what's neat about the second game is you're able to swap them out at any time you wish. You don't have to go to a save point to do it. I really like that. The isometric combat is everything you've come to expect from the first game, but there's an added new feature. The ability for heroes to combine their powers and do super attacks. It's a little bit clumsy and takes some getting used to, but once you figure out the combinations and how they work, it's pretty cool. It's a nice new addition to the combat. Also, these games are fantastic with online co-op, so if you have a friend that also happens to own them, it's a great time. My buddy and I are actually going to be firing both these up here soon and playing them together. While it's really unfortunate that they're delisted, but if you happen to already own these, definitely go and check them out again or play them for the first time because they really are fantastic Marvel games. The amount of classic Marvel superheroes and villains that you're able to play across both these games might not ever happen again. They're fantastic games, so check them out if you're able to. Next we have Yakuza Zero, released worldwide for the PlayStation 4 in 2017. While I've heard of Yakuza for many years, I've always meant to play them, this is actually the first time I've ever played one, even though I own various copies. I'm just simply late to the game, and I can see why people love these games. Clearly these are spiritual successors to Shenmue, which is very cool, because Shenmue introduced a lot of revolutionary things when it came out on the Dreamcast, and Yakuza was able to kind of take that torch and really do something with it. In terms of its graphics and features, it runs at 1080p, locked 60 frames per second. It's not exactly night and day from what it was in PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 4 Pro. It's always been a rather solid running game, but hey, locked is locked, it looks great. Immediately I got sucked into the story. It's very engrossing, very good performances from the Japanese voice acting. The game's story is actually set in the late 80s, which I can appreciate because it really takes me to a nostalgic era. Tube TVs, pagers, it was before the modern era, and I always like it when stories take place in that time. It takes place in a fictional portion of Tokyo, and honestly, it really reminded me of my time in South Korea. I was stationed there for a year and I had a really good time, so it was very nostalgic for me to kind of feel like I was in those streets again. The graphics really are sharp and colorful, and there's a lot going on. I love the fact that you can just walk into a convenience store and there's magazines and food and detail. You really do feel this living, breathing area. But at the end of the day, the heart of the game is the story, characters, and combat, which are all very solid. I was really enjoying myself. The combat has a bit of a learning curve, but it's totally worth it. There's multiple fighting styles you learn as you take down enemies, and it's kind of like an RPG. When you're roaming around, you get randomly attacked by thugs. It's a lot of fun. So for me, being new to the Yakuza franchise, I can absolutely see why it has such a fan base. Especially Shenmue fans that wanted some sort of successor to come about, and well, Yakuza is probably the closest one we have. So my goal is to beat this game and move on to the next chronological installment of the series, Yakuza Kiwami, which I also have, and that could be on the channel in the future if you'd like for it to be. So Yakuza Zero, which is also on Xbox in recent years, very cool game. I highly recommend you check it out. It's a good place to start for the series. And before we get to our last title, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment on the video. I read each and every comment. I'm excited to hear from you all. And finally, we have Shadow of the Colossus, originally released on the PlayStation 2 in 2005, then this remake was released on PlayStation 4 in 2018. So over the years, I'd heard that there were issues with Shadow of the Colossus running on PlayStation 5. From texture loading issues to input latency, I'm not exactly sure all the problems, but from what I can tell, I had no problems. So you let me know in the comments if you're still having issues that you know, because for me, it seems fine. I did see one update in a thread about texture loading that it was a really obvious problem, but there was a console update and then it just cleared itself up. So as far as I know, there's no issues anymore. Now there is some nuance with the different graphical modes. There's a performance mode and a resolution mode. Technically, both of these are based off of the PlayStation 4 architecture. So this never had a PlayStation 5 update. So on the PlayStation 4 Pro, the performance mode, while targeting 60 frames per second at a dynamic resolution of 1080p, that dynamic resolution, of course, willing to downscale in order to help stabilize the frame rate, would still dip down into the 40s during any sort of heavy scenes, particularly with fighting Colossus. The graphical mode, on the other hand, was a 4K resolution, so it looked really nice and it ran at 30 frames per second, and even the 30 frames per second, of course, would dip below that. So it was very impressive on the PS4 Pro, but not perfect. Now on the PlayStation 5, on the other hand, the dynamic resolution in the 1080p performance mode runs at a locked 1080p and a locked 60 frames per second, so it really is a great way to play it. And with the PlayStation 5 Pro, that image enhancement toggle takes it just a little bit further, looking slightly cleaner. I'm not saying it's night and day, but it is that much more onto it. Whereas the 4K mode looks absolutely beautiful and runs at a totally stable 30 FPS. The PS4 game's image enhancement toggle is not going to do a thing with that. So the image quality already looks outstanding on its own. It really just helps the performance mode a little bit. So it really depends on your preference. Both modes look fantastic in their own right. Essentially what's happening here, it's like playing it on the PlayStation 4 Pro but on steroids. It runs really nice. So right before this originally came out on the PlayStation 2, I played it on a demo disc and it absolutely blew my mind. While the visuals were an absolute showcase for the PlayStation 2 at the time, the frame rate is pretty horrible, but it's understandable because it really did push the PlayStation 2 to its absolute limits. Then it got re-released on PlayStation 3 and it really did help it a lot. It stabilized that 30 FPS a lot, it looked cleaner, so that's a great way to play it too. But then Bluepoint went ahead and remade it on PlayStation 4, and man, Bluepoint are just magicians at what they do. They also remade Demon's Souls on PlayStation 5, and that game is phenomenally beautiful and runs like butter. So Bluepoint is easily one of my favorite developers. They really, truly are magicians at their craft. Obviously, Shadow of the Colossus is very well known. It is one of the best classic PlayStation 2 games ever made. There's just hardly anything else like Shadow of the Colossus to this day. It's a truly phenomenal game. The sound, the atmosphere, the animations, the environments, it's a gorgeous game. It's totally unique. The intro is one of the most beautiful intros I've ever seen in a game. It really is phenomenal. Anybody who ever plays this game is just filled with wonder. When you're riding on horseback, the way the camera feels, you feel like you're literally in a real-time shot in Lord of the Rings. Fighting each and every Colossus is like literally fighting a puzzle. It's challenging and endearing. There's a lot of mystery in the lore and the characters. Whether you're reliving the glory days, playing it for the first time, Shadow of the Colossus is one of the greatest games ever made, and this is the premium way to play it, so you owe it to yourself to check it out on PlayStation 5. It runs great. So that was 5 PlayStation 4 games that look and run better than ever on newer hardware. I hope you liked the video. Thank you for watching up to this point. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And check out my recent video where I looked at delisted Valve games through backwards compatibility on Xbox Series X. I was incorrect about Portal though. Thankfully those are still up. Anyway, God bless and take care.